From Einmalines Productions, this is Singletrack, presented by Electric Cable Car. This week on Electric Cable Car, I published an article comparing the old ITRA point system, remember that, to the new UTMB index. There's a story about how that Chipotle Strava marketing stunt ended, which is super fun. You gotta check that out. And lots of updates from various brands making moves for the new year. Decker, parent brand of Hoka, is about to announce a new higher-end shoe brand. I'm looking forward to that. We're also looking forward to the World Trails Major second race of the season, the Black Canyons Ultra. And while we're talking WTM, they also announced their 10th race, the first edition since forming with their original 9 races. The Grand Raid des Pyrénées is located in the south of France, is happening just a week before UTMB, and the various distances have almost 6,000 sign-ups combined. These are mind-boggling numbers, and it's just another example of how we're living in exciting times for the trail racing world. Speaking of trail races, Rock Candy's Beast of Big Creek opened registration for the 15th anniversary race this summer, August 3rd, in Hoodsport, Washington. The only certified sky race course in the US, Beast of Big Creek is an event you have to put on your calendar. Visit beastofbigcreek.com to sign up and come race with us. Now, let's switch gears completely. Servus and hello, I'm your host, Matthias Eichler, and this week on Singletrack, I am talking to Dan Patitucci. Dan has been at home in the mountains almost all his life. He's climbed with many of the top mountaineers and trail runners of our time and photographed their journeys and achievements. Dan has also never before been on any podcast. Singletrack is his first. I'm super honored to bring you this honest conversation with a true legend of our sport that dives into the business of selling mountain photography. We chat about the values of spending time in the outdoors and the differences between mountain life in Europe and on the west coast of the US. Dan is owner of AlpsInsight, a destination anyone who wants to explore the Alps while running trails needs to check out and discover. All right, let's get to it. Here's Dan.
This is my first podcast. I've never done a podcast.
This is super exciting. I feel very honored. Let me just say that. I mean, you on Singletrack, let's just dive right in. Dan Patitucci, you're American, but you have a very Italian last name. Let's start there.
Yeah, my family is very Italian.
Nice.
My mom's whole family immigrated from Italy. And I grew up a bit like with a very Italian-speaking grandmother, and I would go back and forth a bit from Italy. I was always kind of used to Europe. Like Europe was very comfortable for me, and I did always want to live there. So I went there in '97, lived in Tuscany, just to kind of really dial in my Italian because I hadn't really ever studied it or anything. So I lived with a family and did that. And then kind of at the same time was when I was starting to those were the days that I was learning to be a photographer.
That's
and
amazing.
I was shooting photos like street photography, and I'd already been shooting climbing and getting some work. And then I came back to the US and decided to go to photo school. So yeah, I guess the whole Italian thing did kind of play into that.
So a very practical question. When you went over to Europe, do you have dual citizenship? Were you able to stay over there long term, or how do you make this work?
At that time, no, I didn't. I have a Swiss passport now, but
Okay.
at that time, those were more relaxed days. I just overstayed and never got caught. It was Italy, nobody checks. And
That's amazing.
yeah, it was a very different time. I don't think I even knew that I couldn't stay longer than 3 months. I think I was there for 6.
Mm-hmm.
And I never even crossed my mind
Yeah,
that I couldn't be there that long.
that's amazing. So you mentioned the photography thing, and you mentioned street photography. So what you're doing now is, how should I put this? You got into it from a photography first and then the mountains, or did the mountains come first and then the photography? Like you make it sound like you really got into this from a photography side first.
No, it was definitely I was climbing first.
Okay.
So I was a full-time climber for like 10 years. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
really all I did was climb. I lived in my truck and traveled around the Western U.S. and just climbed and was a kind of a dirtbag. And in the mid to late 90s, I started shooting photos. I was kind of working with some brands that were helping me out, and I happened to be really good friends with some good climbers. And so I started shooting them, and I just really enjoyed it. Like I had good luck with like how I did it, and sold some photos, and all of a sudden, some of the brands were having me shoot some stuff for them of their athletes, and one thing led to another, and I was shooting a lot. And so then I took a year, a little more than a year, to kind of travel and do other things, and I started to shoot, like I said, street photography, and I really kind of thought, I want to be a National Geographic photographer. Like I love that style, and
Okay.
it's so cliche. Every photographer says, I want to be a National Geographic photographer. Or back then they did, and so I I took this year of kind of not doing anything. I wasn't even climbing. I was doing other stuff, and so I came back from Italy and made the decision to go to a photography school that used to be in Santa Barbara,
Hmm.
California, called Brooks Institute. So I climbed again for like another couple of years, and then decided I did it. I went off to school, and that changed everything. I dropped out right away, of course, but I did go for a while.
Okay, that was a really funny sequence. I really want to go and learn more about photography. It really changed my life, but I dropped out real quick.
Yeah, the climber in me was too strong. It kind of overrode the whole school thing.
I'm just gonna say, I mean, if you lived out of sort of this nomadic lifestyle, I mean, tying yourself to a school and sort of a regular routine, I was going to ask, must be hard, but it was very hard. You didn't last very long.
No, yeah, I mean, my family was actually from Santa Barbara, so I was really familiar with Santa Barbara.
Mm.
And it's this coastal town, and it's super nice and kind of utopia. And it's a long story, but I ended up living with a 90-year-old, just phenomenally wealthy woman in Montecito. I mean, she's just like beyond wealth, like really old school money, like old world money. And my job was, she was a friend of the family. It's a long story. She was a friend of my grandmother's, and my job was to take care of her on weekends. So I go from this like dirtbag lifestyle, and I had commercial fished in Alaska, which is this like completely other world of just raw, harsh, man world and hard work and grim, and all of a sudden I'm like plopped into Santa Barbara living with this woman who there was a staff of 16 in the house, and food was flown in from all over the world, and I'm like taking care of her, and it was this kind of driving Miss Daisy thing. It was just super weird, it was great. Like it was this great experience. But right at that same time, I met who would become my wife, Shanine, and she was finishing school, and I was just getting started, and I was still getting work. Like I was still getting assignments from climbing magazines, and brands wanted me to do stuff, and I was kind of like, I'd rather just go shoot
Mhm.
rather than be in this school and this kind of weird life that I'm living. So I made it about 9 months, and we moved to my Westphalia. I had a Volkswagen Westphalia, and off we went for 2 years. And she had the skills of like, she had gotten a digital degree and basically a degree in Photoshop.
Mhm. Mhm.
So it was this great combination. I had contacts in the outdoor world. I was kind of known in the outdoor industry, and so it was this great kind of off you go jumpstart to this career that now has
That's
been, gosh, I mean, it's been 24 years.
yeah.
So
I mean,
yeah,
that's fantastic. It's one of those like dream scenarios, right? If somebody
mm,
would want to write a movie script, right? They would literally write your life story
kind
where
of.
things sort of like come together and fall into place. And in some respects, I mean, it almost feels guilty for expressing it that way, but it's also beautiful when it works out that way, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I've definitely been very lucky with a lot of little chance things. I did have to go back and commercial fish again for another year though, because I didn't have much money. So just
You see, I
when we
think
were really getting started.
I think those are the important stories, right? We sometimes forget to mention how much, in order for us to live our dreams, how much we're willing to sort of, I don't want to use the word hustle, right? But sort of make it work and glue pieces together. And especially when you're younger and you don't have a lot of requirements for yourself and commitments and stuff, right? It's a lot easier to live out of a
Yeah.
van and be
Yeah.
simple and stuff, right?
And isn't it also just kind of the American way? Like being an American now living in Europe, there's no way the Swiss would do this, you know? Like there's no way
No,
that
the Swiss certainly wouldn't do this.
like
Yeah.
forget it.
Yeah.
Like you tell them you had to live in your car for 2 years because you were getting started growing a business,
Mm.
they would just think you're crazy. Like they
Yeah.
wouldn't even comprehend something like that because it just
Yeah.
doesn't fit into the mold. But it's the American way that actually, having lived in Europe now all these years, I'm really proud of that.
Hmm.
That's how we kind of think and are,
Yeah.
and we do what it takes.
No, when I was late teenager, I had a friend of mine who was quite a few years older, and we opened a bookstore together, and in a small town in the southwest of Germany. And um, he was doing the most of the heavy lifting because he was older. I was a late teenager, but the general notion that was sort of brought to us is like, why would you open your own business? Why would you try to do something like that, even though, right? I mean, selling books, especially in a culture like Germany where literature and books are valued really highly, would shouldn't be considered something weirdly odd and weird, right? But to your point, right?
Mm,
There is not that entrepreneurial mindset and that willingness to go so far in order to grind it out. And I mean, I'm stumbling over my words because I don't want to sound like an entrepreneur podcast and use these typical
yeah,
buzzwords of like, yeah, this is how we do it.
it's such a cool thing that we can do. Yeah, I mean,
Hmm.
as a photographer, like anyone can. As a friend of mine once said, like you could scratch your name on a rock and boom, you're in business. Yeah, here's my sign, and
Hmm.
you can still do that. Like anybody can do it. And I mean that's global now, but in the old days to like really start a business, it was kind of an unusual thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And what was nice about it being a photographer is that you don't need a lot of you don't have a lot of costs, right? You don't need a lot of
No.
supplies. You don't have a an ongoing expense. You don't need to rent a space, right? I mean, there are certain
Hmm.
businesses, they're a lot harder to start up.
Yeah.
Um, and I mean, yeah, I mean, you're not producing a physical product in that sense either, right? So you can float a little bit more on what you're creating, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I'm kind of jumping ahead a little bit because we're obviously missing a huge part in between, but I'm very curious, and so I'm going to ask it anyway, and then we'll go back to that. But do you feel like this has changed nowadays? Like, do you feel like I've got a 19-year-old kid who is sort of entering college and sort of making their first forays? Do you feel like these same opportunities still exist?
That's something we talk about all the time, and
Right?
I think the only thing I can really say is I don't know. Like
Hmm.
because the opportunities have changed so much. Like looking back, you kind of romanticize how it used to be. You know, it was this magazine assignments and big budgets, and they would send you off on this trip, and you do all these things, and it was this. It sounds also romantic compared to how it is today. But I don't really know what the opportunities are anymore. It's because I still kind of work in my old way, and
Mm.
it's barely working these days though. Like I've evolved, but only to a point. I think that the times have just changed so much that I'm almost unable to evolve to those
Hmm.
like new requirements and the new ways of working.
Yeah.
um but I do believe there's a lot of opportunity still, maybe more so than ever, but the playing field is so much bigger. that's
Hmm.
that's the thing that's really changed. Is just when I started, it was probably 15, 20 photographers were working in the outdoor space, in the US, and now, my
Yeah.
God, yeah, like kind of the whole population seems to be wanting to play.
Hmm.
So I don't know, like y- like working with within the outdoor industry, which I'm really committed to staying in the outdoor industry until the very end. It's really hard to get work like it used to be, because
Yeah.
everybody says that you talk to, well, we don't need to pay for photography, we just get it for free.
Hmm.
It's free everywhere. Or they don't need stuff the way they needed it before. They don't need trade show displays and all these campaigns shot and workbooks and catalogs. Now they just need little squares. So
Just need
it's
little
just changed
square.
so much. And
Yeah.
and photography used to be hard. It was like we were shooting film, and it cost money, and you'd have to go get it processed and FedEx it and have it FedEx back, and it was work.
Hmm. Hmm.
And now it's just so easy.
It
Um,
reminds me, have you watched the film The Secret Life of Walter Mitty?
yeah.
Then the new one where Ben Stiller, that reminds me of what you are describing, sort of these photographers where, because they were fewer and it was still done on film, right? There was more value put into, because you physically actually had to be there to capture the shot, right? But if
Hmm.
now everybody has a a camera in their pocket, like I'm looking at my teenagers, and I mean, I'm Gen X. I don't want to ever take a picture taken of myself. I don't want to be in front of the camera. That's the way I grew up. And now they are constantly taking photos, and they're not worrying about it being the best shot. Like, they are updating their Snapchat to dozens of friends with dozens of blurry in between photos. And it's in the moment is what they're after. They don't
Hmm.
take 20 pictures and then make sure that it's perfectly filtered and photoshopped or whatever, right? They don't give a crap about
Yeah.
this. It's like it's such a different way of sort of taking a medium that used to be completely precious and
Yeah.
treasured.
Precious is a good word. Yeah. The images used to all need to be so good.
Yeah.
And now what we've got somebody's attention for zero point zero 0.02 seconds,
Hmm.
so it needs to have a feel, but the standards can be so much different. They're so much lower.
Yeah. Well,
The-
and the shots need to be good, but it was also like, I mean, if you even just had a camera with you, then you captured a moment, and perhaps that's the National Geographic sort of thought that you're bringing in of like wanting to be a National Geographic photographer. Like, you went on assignment because there was a story that you wanted to tell. And if nobody was there with a camera, then there was literally no photographic evidence of this, right?
yeah.
But
Yeah.
nowadays, everybody their uh, has cameras everywhere. So there's hardly anything that doesn't get captured, that doesn't get
Yeah.
recorded anymore, right? So how do you
Yeah.
then stand out and make it special?
Yeah. And now AI, we can,
Oh,
you
let's
know,
not. Oh,
hey,
let's put a button on that.
well, just real quick,
Yes.
today I got my first contract. A magazine licensed a few images from us, and they sent me their contract, and I was reading it, and it said these are real photographic images, not artificial intelligence produced.
Oh my
I've never
gosh.
seen that. Was the first time I'd seen that.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
they at least they were requiring that it's a real photo.
yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, when you mentioned something, I was worried that they would say that somehow that they would require AI, or they would want to use your photos to generate AI or anything. So this way around, at least it's good. You're still um being
Valued as a
valued.
photographer. Yeah.
Exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, let's jump back a little bit. So we need, because there's this whole in between that we need to talk about. So you did the nomadic life. You had found your business partner and then wife. At what point do you then sort of like build your own business beyond that sort of client work where you're sort of freelancing?
We worked just purely as photographers until about actually until we moved to the Dolomites. We
Okay.
moved to the Südtirol, to the Italian Dolomites in 2007, and like full time 2008.
Mhm.
And I wanted to live in Europe. I wanted to see what it was all about. I wanted to feel it. Shanine, my wife, is Swiss, so um, she was into it. She was, we were in the German part. She speaks German. Um, so when we got there, I was just so incredibly stoked on living in Europe in like one of the most beautiful places in the world that I started this website very similar to what we're doing in the Alps now, but it was about the Dolomites.
Okay.
And it was just sort of like sharing my enthusiasm for the Dolomites. And this stuff just didn't exist then.
Hmm.
And it was about running and climbing and ski touring, and I blogged and did fun stuff with like the culture and my friends, and I was always running. Like that was definitely a big part of it. Um, I was when we moved to the Dolomites, I definitely was more of a cyclist and climber, but I was like running was always still a part of my life.
Hmm.
And years before, we had run the Alta Via One in the Dolomites and done a story on it for Trail Runner magazine. So I took that idea to some friends that are a tour operator there, and I said, "Hey, let's run the Alta Via One and document it with just our friends, like as a group, and you sell the trip, like you offer the trip as a tour operator." So we did this, and it was like early social media, and this thing just like blew up. Like the
Hmm.
Dolomites just became like a big blip on a lot of people's radar
Hmm.
for running and doing different things. And our website grew, and we started to do really well with it. But then fast forward, we leave the Dolomites and we move to Switzerland. And I do it again in Switzerland. I gave the website, the Dolomite website, to the tour operator friend. We're really good
Hmm.
friends,
Hmm.
and he kind of took it over. Um, but then when we got to Switzerland, I started AlpsInsight, and we kind of didn't know what to do with it. It was kind of the same thing. Um, we started to build it, but it was really just an outlet for my enthusiasm for living there.
Hmm.
But then in 2016, we met our partner Kim. She became part of the program, and we met her on a commercial uh, running shoot and became really good friends like instantly. And she had a background in writing and photography and graphic design. It was like, oh my gosh, and she was looking for work. So we decided to team up, and as soon as we did, we came up with the idea for the Run the Alps Switzerland guidebook.
Hmm.
So we immediately started to work on the guidebook to Switzerland, to the running in the Alps. And at the same time, we were kind of recognizing, well, we're creating all this other stuff that we could be putting on that website. So we started to kind of build the website as a trail running resource. The book came out in 2018, and we had 30 runs in it. And then our website had probably 50 at that point. And we started to see we're getting like real traffic now, and people were really using the site. It was selling the book. People were seeing other runs. We started to tell stories from the Alps and do ski tours for the site and climbing things, and it just started to grow as this resource. Um, then kind of some interesting things started to happen that are a little bit unique to Europe in that uh, the tourism industry, so all the regions in Switzerland, the cantons, the regions,
Hmm.
they started hiring us simply to come to their regions. We're kind of influencers. I hate to say it.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah.
They wanted us to come and do runs in their regions, talk about them, and we always had this agreement: if they're good, we'll put them on our website. But if they're not good, we're not going to include them. Like there
Hmm.
really has to be a standard.
Hmm. Hmm.
So all of a sudden, we're you know doing work for these regions, these tourism offices. Swiss Tourism hired us to create 25 runs for a website that we helped build for them. So it's really to showcase trail running in Switzerland. They're all our runs. And all of a sudden, our site has 100 runs on it, and it's become like this big guidebook to the
Yeah.
Alps. And it's got a lot of traffic, and people are downloading the runs, and the feedback was incredible. We've got advertising. It just blossomed, and it was something I never saw coming. That that it
What
would
is?
be, its own thing.
Yeah.
And it came at a good time because at the same time, the photography industry was kind of, it's getting harder and harder to work.
Hmm.
So the two
That's
just work together perfectly.
I mean, that's amazing. I mean, you somewhat l- started a passion project, you scratched your own itch, as they always say, right? And
Hmm.
it can grow into something. And yeah, I mean, this is something we should talk about this because you're now over here in California on the West Coast, and I have a guidebook over here now too. We should talk a little bit about these differences. But yeah, it is in Europe. Tourism is something that is understood to be a positive economic driver, and there's a lot of
Hmm.
focus and effort being made on bringing people
Completely
to
different
these
there. Yeah.
places, right?
Hmm.
When over here, if you want to try to bring people into town, right? People look at you and like, wait, no, I've got my house
Yeah.
here. I don't want anybody to shop it. It's a completely different feeling, right?
Completely different. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah, I mean, I like this would never happen. Like I'm in Bishop, California, and
Hmm.
we do work actually a little bit with the tourism office here because they did want some very similar thing. They wanted some running, and they wanted us to promote it and talk about it. And I mean, it's just minuscule compared
Yeah.
to what we do in Switzerland. Like I mean,
Yeah.
like in terms of budgets and project size, and yeah, very different.
Yeah, I mean, in the Alps, they've discovered four-season tourism, right? And they've
Yeah,
very smartly discovered that skiing is increasingly under threat with climate change. So they are really adopting
pushing summer
and
tourism.
pushing
Yeah,
tourism because the infrastructure already exists, right?
yeah, yeah,
And also these valleys and tourism regions, they're so fascinatingly set up because that's also something that you don't get over here, where in Europe you've got these valleys and essentially the cable cars are built, the tourist attractions are built because the town council is comprised of the two restaurants and the hotel owner and the farmer, right? I mean, there
yep,
is not
yep.
this corporate money there that would skew this around. It's all individuals living in these valleys for generations who are sort of deciding the fate on how they're sort of making this work, right?
Yeah, yeah. And there's this mentality there, and this has become a big issue for me and something we often talk about is in Europe, we refer to the Alps as a playground
Hmm.
because of the rules are so relaxed. Like they build zip lines and they do all this goofy stuff everywhere. There's just infrastructure everywhere. And I'm kind of just so over that. Like I want to come back to America where there's wilderness and wild
Hmm.
open space and no people and no development, and there can't be any.
Yeah.
And I would never, I hope, say or refer to the American mountains as a playground because that sort of denigrates them and shows disrespect. And that's become a really strong feeling in me. Uh, and it's
Hmm.
like I don't want that to happen here. Yes, we can go trail running in the mountains, and yes, we can be excited about it and share that with people because people are going to run here, and it's
Yeah.
growing, and we can take an opportunity to educate people and talk about what we're doing, but let's not let it be a playground. And I want to.
Yeah.
That's why I want to come back to the U.S. I want to come back to this wild space. It's
Hmm.
so refreshing to be in these days.
Yeah. I read or I listened to a podcast, and it was a German podcast, and they were talking about a cultural environment versus a natural environment. And I don't know if I'm translating it right, but this sort of there is no wilderness in Europe, right? Everything, the
Hmm.
landscape, the environment that's been built is heavily influenced by culture. I mean, there's a whole aspect of why the cows are so important in these valleys because they actually prevent the trees from growing and actually creating wild spaces again, right? And that's why they
That's
want to
right.
keep these cows in these places because the Alps are
Hmm.
known for these green, lush meadows and not for trees everywhere, right? And
Right.
everything
Right.
would change if you move, get rid of the cows, right? Where over here, there's so many spaces where we still have true wilderness, and that is worth protecting, and it's something different, right? Even though for me as a European, I wish we would have a few more gondolas. We wish we would have a few more places that, um, I don't know, I mean, outdoor tourism is growing over here and our places are overrun, right? I mean, you can't really say, I mean, you say you don't like playgrounds, but is Yosemite Valley not already a playground? Like, how far away are we? Like certain
Yosemite's
places,
a bit of a playground.
right?
Yeah, yeah,
I think it's in certain places we've arrived and we sort of need to acknowledge that and perhaps dedicate certain places to be that. Mount Rainier is another one of those areas where the main sort of access points for tourists, they're so overrun and so clogged up with cars. There is no more wilderness left, right? I mean, you need to approach access and hospitality with it, right? Differently, because the
hmm
people are anyway already going to be there, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So,
Yosemite's an interesting example because it certainly is, and it's isolated in the mountains. There's no big town kind of right there.
yeah,
Whereas in Europe, these towns are literally in the mountains, and that it's such a big difference.
yeah. The
You know, I Grindelwald, and is a great example. Is
mm,
it's right next to where I live in Interlaken, and in town, it's just the infrastructure there just spreads out from town of zip lines and those trottinettes, bikes, and skydiving and paragliding and all the stuff that kind of comes into town because town is there. So it's just so
mhm.
easy to build this thing. Whereas here it's kind of set off on its own, and maybe that helps, and maybe it isolates these areas.
Yeah. I think so. Partially too, because all of the really wild places are then federally managed, right? So even if
Yeah,
there is a
yeah,
town close by, they can't really take these places and own them, right? I mean,
yeah,
if I don't know, what is the closest town in next to Yosemite Valley, right? I mean, if they would
like
say that it would be advantageous to build a gondola, they wouldn't get it.
yeah, yeah. No, no. I mean, it just doesn't work. I mean, space is just too big.
Yeah. Yeah.
They certainly do it within the park because they have to accommodate so many people. But then you build an ice skating rink, and it all gets a little bit funny.
I know, I know. It is and also interesting to look at the history because pre-Wilderness Act, there was a strong attempt being made to turn these national parks that we have in the US into playgrounds, right? I mean, there was
Mhm.
a big effort made. I mean, at Mount Rainier at Paradise, there it was, I think, some Olympic ski trials at some like in the early 19th century or so. So there were like ski competitions at Mount Rainier, right? And that's
Yeah.
something you couldn't even remotely think about happening today, right?
No. Yeah. Then this is such a big, other conversation. Like, yeah, I don't just, but it's part of living in Europe, and kind of existing there and playing, in those mountains, and then coming here and being in these mountains,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
kind of two different things.
It is a very different life. And if you see, I don't know how much you're involved into this, but if you've seen the controversies around UTMB, the race in the trail running world over the last 6 months, you can see how different people look at trail running and being in the on trails and stuff, right? Where
Yeah.
in Europe, in Chamonix, I mean Chamonix, right? I mean, talking about the playground, right? There
Yeah.
it's fully understood that um, these events are fully supported by businesses and
Yeah.
sponsors, and you grow this and stuff. And over here, you can't even grow it. It's
No.
financially not really advantageous to even try because you're limited by permitting. There's only so
Yep.
many people that going to be able to run Western states. You just you just can't get more people on the
Yeah.
trails, right?
Yeah. And you're limited in the terrain where you can go because so much of it is just off limits from the very
Exactly.
beginning. And in
Exactly.
Europe, they just choose a trail, and then pretty much becomes what they want it to be.
Yeah. It's
Matt?
more of a self um controlling then, right? Because I mean there is probably at some point UTMB would explode, right? I mean if they would just allow more and
Yeah,
more and more and more runners, eventually it would become impossible, right? I mean there is sort of a
yeah,
self-regulation that needs to happen. Hopefully happens, right?
yeah. I mean, I first did the Tour Mont Blanc. We ran it in 3 days in 2003, I think, or four, somewhere in
Hmm.
there. And it was kind of single track around the Mont Blanc Massif. And I did it again in like, man, that must have been 6 or 7 years ago. And it's basically a 2-lane highway around the Massif now in a lot of the areas. It's just completely, the trail's been widened so much, and there's all the corners are cut, from the race, and
Hmm.
it's trashed. Like in a lot of places, it's just this giant highway. And I mean, I keep this folder of images because I'm going to do this at some point, post a story about this. I keep a folder of photos that I make from trails where there's races, where they put, every rock will have a neon yellow arrow on it or a glow in the dark dot. Just come on, just up these mountain trails that are just kind of pristine for a while. Now they're loaded with arrows and dots and markers, and come on, like we don't need to be doing this for these races.
I mean
and
to
and
put
people just don't seem to care. They just
paint
don't
markers on
care.
it is a little bit much, right?
Oh, in Grindelwald for the Eiger race, they put this glow in the dark yellow paint on every rock on the trail, like for 100 kilometers. It's unbelievable, and they're there year round.
I guess you don't get lost then.
No, I mean, yeah, but it just shows to me, being kind of an American coming from wilderness, like, is this really necessary?
Yeah.
And it's the mind frame. It goes deeper. That's just part of it. It's just they let things go, and it damages the environment. It's a bad precedent to set, and I don't want to see that here.
Hmm.
I really don't want to see that here in the U.S.
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective because that clearly sort of takes it to a level that is something that me, big pro Europe voice, even I would have to agree that that's going too far.
Yeah,
There are ways of marking a course that it doesn't put permanent paint on it, right? I mean, I don't
yeah,
know. Are they getting the advantages that they don't have to mark the course every year because it's permanently there? I mean, if that's I mean, even that, I mean, you can do that with wayfinding signs, right? You can add a permanent sign to the wayfinding signs that are already at every intersection, right? I mean, there are ways that you could help yourself with annual course marking that doesn't require painting a rock at every turn, right?
right. Yeah, no, that's how it goes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So interesting perspective. So you've lived now for many years in Europe. Right now, you're back in California. Is this a permanent move, or is it just too snowy right now over there?
No, we're in the process of building a little place here. So
Okay.
we, yeah, so we are slowly making the transition back. And I don't know if it'll be full time because I really don't like hot summers, and the Alps
Okay.
are awfully nice in the summer.
Yep. Yep.
So, but we'll see. I mean, I like long term, I definitely see being back in the US. Janine much prefers California over Europe. The weather, the mentality, uh, yeah, just the community. The community is the number one thing.
Hmm.
That's the thing that we miss more than anything, is just this incredible group of friends and
Do
kind of
you?
quirky lifestyles, quirky people. This is
Yeah. Yeah.
it.
Yeah. The quirkiness is hard to find in Switzerland, right?
There's no quirk. Yeah, it's quirk. It's definitely quirk free.
It is quirk free.
Uh,
That's hilarious. Oh my gosh. Now I lost my next question. So,
right.
but what I see, and I'm curious, this lead turns into a question, is that in Europe, you do have community, though, in these valleys, right? I mean, people do congregate um, and live a mountaineering life, sometimes even closer together than in the US, where things are often really spread out.
Hmm.
Because when you lived over there, you got to know a lot of um, climbers and mountaineers and trail
Hmm.
runners and stuff. So it's not like the community doesn't exist, right?
No, it definitely exists. It's just very different. It's in the U.S. It seems like when you go to do something here, it's sort of like this. It's on a pedestal for the day. So it's like a couple people go out, friends go out, you go for a run, you get back from the run, you hang out at the car, you eat chips and salsa, you chat a bit, you do this or that. Then you go back to town and you run into another friend. They need help moving the refrigerator, and you go help them move the refrigerator. Then you run to the store and you run into another friend. They invite you over for dinner, and that's kind of how it goes. There's your day, which is fantastic. But in Europe, it's always like, okay, we're gonna run at 7, but I have to be back at the house at 10, and there's no chips and salsa at the car. It's like straight back to the house because you live. You don't have well, you don't even have to drive most of the time.
Hmm.
It's everyone is kind of it's more structured. It's like, okay, we're gonna run at 7, then I go right home and I go to do something else that's productive.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
there's less of this like vibe. There's less of this hanging out and moving the refrigerator, like,
I
and like randomly going to a potluck, that you weren't prepared for. And it it's this, which I value so much, and it's what I miss. But
yeah.
then the productive performance side of it is the European kind of side. But there's less room for this hanging out lifestyle, and
It's a
maybe that's what it
fascinating.
comes down to,
Yeah, that's a
hanging out.
fascinating observation because I would describe it the exact opposite, that I feel like Germans
Really?
do have more time because they're not constantly on their phone, they're not constantly hustling two or three
Ah,
jobs, right? They actually, when they do, especially when they do like go on vacation, they actually take the vacation, where Americans never head out. They never, they might, you know, 48 hours of vacation, that's their annual vacation, right?
maybe I just released a little secret about Bishop.
I think so. I think you like shared a little secret about a community that is very
It's very special.
yeah,
Yeah,
and
it's
very
very
special and
special.
very away from the big cities, right? Because I
Yeah,
think if
yeah,
you live closer to San Francisco, you don't get that. You get
yeah.
DoorDash and Uber
Okay.
drives and
So I'm only talking about one little particular 4,000 population town in the U.S.
yeah, yeah.
But it's funny, like we left in 2007, 8 in that period, and we had our group of friends, and we were all about 40 at the time, I guess. So yeah, that's where everyone was. Kids were just starting to come onto the scene, and it was just like every day was like, okay, let's go, spring skiing, and depending on the time of year, then we go down. We can go bouldering in the afternoon. Tomorrow we're going to go sport climbing. We go for a run, this and that. And now I come back, all these years later, and my friends are kind of still. They're all the same friends, and they're all kind of doing the same thing, but they're a little bit slower. But Kim, who's younger, who lives here, I see she's with all of her friends. They're doing the exact same thing. They all work funny jobs, and they kind of have some time to play, and they take advantage of it, and they get after it on Tuesday afternoons, and it's fantastic.
I mean,
And and
it's really great to hear because the sort of overarching stories that we're hearing from mountain towns is that, as the Airbnb culture moves in, it's increasingly hard for sort of these dirt baggers just working odd jobs and taking the time to sort
yeah,
of climb because the weather is out, right? Because they're
yeah,
increasingly being priced out, um, because these tourist towns are completely overrun, right? So it's
yep.
great that this still exists.
It still exists. I'm definitely seeing it.
Good.
And that's why these people move here. They want to be doing these things. So they just kind of make it work. And like thinking about what people do for work, they are often all working in the evenings. And that's
Mm,
definitely something that a lot of them are doing. So,
yeah,
but they're crushing during the day for sure.
that's amazing. That's
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about your perspective. You've been now working in the outdoor sort of industry for so many years, and we've touched on this already a little bit, but I'd love to talk a little bit more of sort of what you see, like some of the trends are, on we've experienced this global pandemic, and now we've sort of come out of this, and it's like how have things changed for you? How do you feel like when you're talking to clients and other people in the industry? What's the feeling?
I don't. It really hasn't changed that much. I think from like when I started, say, in even like in 1999. In some ways, it's the same.
Hmm.
Everyone wants to sell their product, and I play a specific role in that. Like when I help a brand, when I get hired, or whether it be for photography or as like an athlete or whatever it is, it's kind of the same. I have to say, honestly, we still get sent on trips to focus on shooting products. Thought that nothing has changed there.
Yeah.
Like I went to on big trips in those early years, and a brand loads you up with product. They pay you X amount of money. They want a bunch of photos. Right now, I go on a big trip. They give us a bunch of product. They pay us X amount of money.
Yeah, yeah,
It's kind of the same.
yeah. Hmm.
I mean, you have to play a lot of little kind of games that didn't exist back then. The social media thing, and of course, they want to know, what's your social media kind of following like, and that becomes a factor. And they want you to communicate things a certain way if you're going to be involved in with the brand. But otherwise, there's just more people.
Hmm.
That's the big thing. There's just more of everything. There's more brands. There's more people. There's more opportunity.
Well, that's good. I mean,
There's
that's
more, just more.
yeah, yeah. I mean, in some
Maybe that's
respects,
not a
that's
good thing.
surprising, right? Because we hear that, I mean, Outside Magazine is, stopping print and folding certain titles and stuff, right? And they're sort of in the journalism world, there is sort of a worry that there isn't enough there anymore. As I mean, I don't even want to talk about AI, but just in general, right? That sort of these written articles aren't respected anymore,
Well,
and
yeah,
stuff,
that's
right?
completely changed. Yeah, I
Yeah.
didn't even touch on media. I mean,
Hmm.
yeah. I mean, of course, there used to be a news story that you know you, somebody did something big in Yosemite in 1999. You had to wait until the magazine came out to find out what exactly happened.
Hmm.
And now you find out about it as it's going down.
Yeah, yeah.
So
You
yeah,
have to.
that I mean, of course, has completely changed. And I often wonder, like, because I've been at it so long and I'm just like so immersed in that world, and I literally like am in the mountains 365 days a year doing these things. I kind of don't even pay attention to that stuff anymore.
Yeah.
There's a few things that I follow to kind of stay current, but it's I really don't pay much attention to any of that stuff. I see it, peripherally because of social media, but I really kind of skim over a lot of it and just do my thing.
Well, that's
And,
good.
and yeah, yeah, I've
And
aged out of a lot of it.
yeah, yeah, exactly. You
Yeah,
aged out.
yeah,
Well, but it also means that you've established a business in a way, right? That you don't have to worry about every temperature change, right? I mean, you have sort of your connections with certain brands that you can sort of rely on, and once these connections are established, you feel a little bit more assured that the work's going to keep coming in a sense, right?
yeah, yeah. I mean, we started with Patagonia in '99. They literally took us under their wing and like built our business. They helped us build our business. They
Hmm.
sent us around the world. We went on trips for them. We did all. It was just we would go to their offices in Ventura. They would load us up for a trip. They would give us kind of some direction. Off we'd go. We're still doing the same thing, and they still treat us the same. Like it's
Yeah, that's
incredible.
amazing.
All
Yeah,
these
that.
years, it's like a big family, and it hasn't changed. It's they still kind of respect the way photographers work, and they
Mhm.
they still take care of people and very respectful, I would say.
Yeah.
And I mean that's we're lucky because we are kind of grandfathered in with them, but there are a few brands like that. Black Diamond's like that. They
Hmm.
still treat photographers very well. It's the new young brands with the 20-year-old social media managers that, they kind of figuring everything out, and they're playing by a very different set of rules, I think.
Hmm. Hmm.
But those old brands have not changed, and
Oh, that's
I don't think
cool.
we've changed necessarily that much.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and the photos you create, they are still inspiring, right? You are not phoning it in. I think that's something that the brands value and people recognize.
Yeah,
And I think that's an important piece, right? Um, because you do have to find a way of, I mean, you have your language, right? There's definitely a certain view when I look at your photos, I can see that they all come from the same lens in some respects, right? But you do need to keep it fresh so you're not yeah, that you don't get bored for yourself, right? Because I think brands would
exactly.
see that, right?
Yeah. Yeah, as a photographer, I'd say I've become extremely lazy as a photographer, but I've become more motivated as an athlete.
Okay.
So I guess what that means is I literally shoot the vast majority of our running work with a Sony RX100, a tiny little point and shoot, but that's all I carry. So it
Hmm.
allows me to move fast, go with whoever, and uh, and shoot further in the mountains, on any given day. I'm not carrying anything with me. But like you nailed it. I mean, you said like I see that you kind of shoot with a similar lens, and that's because it is.
Hmm.
It's just this little point and shoot. But I mean, I get images that are real
Yeah.
because of that. Like I set things up, of course, where we're running on a trail and it's like, oh, this is a great spot. Like, can you run through here again? Of course I do that.
Hmm.
But I also see things in the distance, whether maybe I fall behind people or I'm off in front of them and I look back or I look in the distance ahead of me and I shoot stuff like on the fly. And I still love doing that because that's kind of the street photographer, in me and the
Hmm.
journalist in me. And it's when you've been doing it for so long, that's the challenge, right? Is to nail the real shot, that
Hmm.
you just see and react to really quickly and you get it. And I still am so excited when I pull that off, and I love it because I'm photographing what I see as an athlete. Really,
Hmm.
like as you're running, you see these things, right? Like, oh my god, like when that person made that little turn, like it was so beautiful, like the way they were set against the mountains. And if you're not a runner, you don't necessarily understand that.
Hmm.
So I'm often trying to recreate that, or I'm trying to get it on the fly. Are these things that I see when I'm really out, and I'm
Yeah.
out every day.
Yeah.
Today I wasn't out. I actually worked out indoors today. The
Nice.
rare, the
Rare,
rare day indoors.
a rare day. No, no camera, no spontaneous. Oh, that's a good angle. Just in the garage.
Yep, I was in my friend's garage. That's exactly it. Yeah.
But this is a good way of approaching it. I mentioned earlier that like as young kids sort of capturing and getting used to capturing everything on the fly, for you to be able to find it's not a compromise, it's sort of a bridge between it is a good camera, a good lens, so you get the high quality shot, but you're allowing yourself to shoot a little bit more on the fly as opposed to drone photography and
Hmm.
monster cameras. It creates a different setup which then creatively doesn't give you that on the fly anymore, right? You have to work harder
Yeah.
to be, they still appear spontaneous.
Yeah. 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 Just the setup thing. I mean, of course, I do it for like commercial work, but it's not really my style, and it
Hmm.
never was. I always wanted to be the athlete photographer, which you used to have to be an athlete to be in the outdoor space, game of photography. And nowadays it's a big mix. A lot of people, of course, are, and there's young people that are doing, amazing stuff. Um, but yeah, I mean, to keep going, that's just, I wouldn't do it if I had to work any other way.
Yeah.
That's my style. And the lightweight thing started, I was, really good friends with Uli Steck. And there was no way that I could carry a heavy camera
Yeah.
when I would go out with him.
Hmm.
And we did so much stuff together just for fun. And of course I always wanted to shoot. So those were the days that I got rid of the heavy stuff and
Hmm.
switched over to like really lightweight gear.
Yeah.
And I started to understand like what's really more about the image than making it like really truly perfect, like taking
Mhm.
time. I'd rather just shoot on the move and let it all be just so simple.
Well, I
It's just what
think,
I value.
especially for trail running, I think that works. I have big conversations with a friend of mine who is a photographer who he's also a big skier, and his take is that trail running will never appear as cool as skiing because
Oh, for
the
sure. Totally
weightlessness
agree.
and effortless, right? So you agree
Yeah.
with that, right? But
Oh, yeah, yeah.
I mean, I don't ski, so I love skiing movies, right? So I do see a sense in there, but I think it's also interesting if you then take it one step further, right? With climbing, because people sometimes hang on a wall for hours trying to solve a problem, you can work as a photographer, you can work the angle so much easier and really find the perfect spot, right? And so you've got the skiing where you have this magical flow of almost weightlessness, and you've got the climbing, which is very stationary. But trail running is sort of like its own beast. You have to be on the fly, right? You have to be willing to sort of take that, translate the the speed, the energy, um the movement, right?
Yeah. It's, believe me, I have scoured the internet and Instagram for like, what more can you do with trail running? And I don't find it like it's all kind of the same. Whereas climbing and skiing, there's this much broader range of imagery, and I think it's so much more interesting. Trail running is fantastic to do, and the images are beautiful. But I think unless you're shooting a race where you're getting really true emotion, um, like Alexis Berg, the French photographer,
Mhm.
he's the best race
Yes.
photographer in the world for
Yep.
sure. And his work is phenomenal because he's getting the emotion and he knows how to compose and the light is good and he processing is good. But if you just go shoot running, it's just kind of like, we just go for a run, and it's a funny thing. Like, I mean, if anyone is out there who wants to like bust into the trail running photo business, figure out how to shoot running lifestyle because it's the big thing. Is the brands all say, well, we don't really need any running photos, but we need running lifestyle. And I'll
Hmm.
say, well, what is that? Like what exactly is that? And they're like, yeah, like stopping and eating something and jumping over a log. Like, come on.
But
Like,
it's a fascinating conversation, but perhaps that's a little bit like movies where the biggest sort of attraction movies are the movies where we go beyond of our ordinary lives, right? Where we have superheroes or science fiction, where we're sort of creating a world that doesn't really exist. And for the average person, going down a ski slope somewhere in Alaska that you flew up with a helicopter on some completely untouched snow feels otherworldly, right? It feels like something that a normal person that wouldn't experience. But trail running or running in general just feels too close to real life. It's too
mhm,
ordinary of an activity
mhm.
that even if it is phenomenally beautiful, it doesn't quite capture the imagination because,
No,
right?
no, yeah, yeah.
Nah, perhaps there's an, I want to fight it because I feel like there is an angle there, but I'm not going to fight it with you because you've looked at every single angle, I believe.
Well, it's the same thing with movies. Like running films, they can't be about running. They need to be about the people and the
Mhm.
relationships and the hardship that goes on outside of running. But as soon
Mhm.
as you talk about running or present running, super boring, right?
Yeah.
When you're going to tell a running story, you're going to talk about anything other than running. It's just the setting, but it's what's going on.
Yeah.
And it's the same with these lifestyle photos, right? Like it's all about two people go for a run, and it's somehow you have to get this brief moment that happens on the run where you're not running, right?
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
which the point is you go running.
Yeah.
So it's this odd thing to have to go kind of capture. And we all have our cliche shots that you see over and over again at the car and
Yeah.
sitting and
Yeah.
yeah, legs up and yada yada yada.
No,
So
no,
yeah, but
it's
at a
true.
race you can do it because a race is there is a little bit more suffering and there's a story to tell.
Hmm. Yeah,
Yeah,
there's a little
but it
bit more pressure to before it puts people into an interesting pressure chamber because they're signing up for something really, really hard. Wherein if you just go out for a run, it's just so much easier to give up. It's so much easier. Or if you go in
exactly
the FKT, everybody looks at you. It's like, well, if you're suffering for your own sake. I don't feel
exactly
sorry for you, right? But in a
yeah
race,
yeah
there is something there. Do
yeah
you shoot race photography?
zero.
Zero.
Yeah, zero. Yeah, no, I avoid it kind of like plague. Yeah, every year I get hired to do a UTMB thing, or I get an offer, and I'm just like, busy. Yeah,
I am busy.
I just don't want to. It's not my thing. Like I
Mhm.
have done it. I shot like Western States years ago, and it was
Mhm.
fun, but it's not my thing. Yeah,
It's not your thing, not just from a professional thing, but also from a personal thing. When you come into trail running from a mountaineering, from a sort of being in these wild places by yourself, and
yep,
trail racing is sort of a really odd duck in the outdoor world because it's the exact opposite of why almost everyone else spend time in the outdoors, right? You
yeah,
bring people
yeah,
together, you want to be close together. When you try as a mountaineer, you try to be on the one mountain where nobody else is, right?
yeah, yeah, and with completely different objectives.
Hmm.
My objectives are all like either things of my own creation, they're ideas that I have of link ups or just whatever it is, enchainments, multiple passes in a day, whatever it is. But it's to go do with either alone or with a couple of friends maximum,
Hmm.
and kind of keep it to ourselves. And they're just it's so fun to do that. And but as soon as you talk about I recently wrote a blog on our site where Kim and I we've been to Nepal now together twice to do some big running stuff in the Khumbu Valley where Everest is. And they see you running there, and every single person is saying, "Oh, you're here for the Everest Marathon." Nope.
Hmm.
No, well, then they're just like, "What are you training for?" I'm not. I'm here to just run, and they just think you're just crazy. But why can't runners have objectives like climbers have objectives and hikers have an objective of a tour? A runner goes and can have an objective.
Hmm.
But as soon as they see you're running, they assume that well, you must be training for a race, or why else would you be running?
Yeah. No, it is true, and it's something that I get sucked into that um the most purest way of trail running is finding your own objectives. Um, but it is so easy to commit yourself to a race because you're signing up and you're paying for something 6 to 9 months
Hmm.
out, right? And then you know you're
Hmm.
going to be doing it. And then you're holding your training schedule towards it. Wherein if you
Hmm.
have your own, I have a few objectives here in the Olympics, and they just always fall to the wayside, right? Either they don't fit my training plan for a race, or if I think of going, then the weather doesn't turn, I don't show up. Where and if it would be a race, I would show up even if the weather is shit, right?
Yeah,
But
yeah,
I think that
true.
there's an aspect where racing, and I always say that, is a huge accessibility creator for folks who don't have the times, the means, the skills, or the desires to sort of create their own routes, right? So I think
Hmm.
there's
Hmm.
something hugely enabling about giving people these experiences in the mountains by saying, hey, just follow these flags, put this bib on, follow these flags, and you'll have an amazing day out, right?
Yeah,
Um,
it's where you live. I mean, I where I live, I could climb the Eiger from my house if I want, and like I got stuff out the door,
right.
so of course I kind of go in that direction. But yeah, if
Yeah.
you live in the Midwest or something and you need an objective, yeah, you don't have the skill set. Probably you're not in the mountains every day, so it's kind of seems really hard. So it's an accessibility thing.
Hmm.
A race is a much more tangible objective.
Yeah. And safer too. I mean, that's what drew me to
Yeah,
trail running and away from
yeah,
climbing, right? That I just was never spending enough time in the mountains to truly get comfortable with the risk level. And so I was able to find sort of that feeling of adventure running
yeah,
trails and still feeling like, okay, I know I'm gonna be home for dinner. My,
yeah.
my family doesn't have to worry about me.
I think I'm less of a. I mean, maybe I'm like less of a trail runner and more of just a big dayer. You
I
know,
like
like it's just
this.
because I'm willing to to combine so many things. Like I'm
Hmm.
totally cool with like I'm just going to walk uphill for 2,000 meters,
Hmm.
and then I'm going to climb a little ridge and then descend it all, you know, in the dark. And like I'm totally cool with that. I don't look at pace or I don't care.
Right.
But I
I'm
do run every day. Yeah. So I'm apparently training for something because
exactly. So what
I mean,
race are
there
you
is
doing?
running involved.
Yeah,
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 there is
yeah.
running involved, but
I remember
but
as a teenager with friends of mine in the Alps, we always tried to hike as fast as possible, which means we ran all the downhills. I mean, we ran trails in the 90s before I knew that trail running existed, right? We had hiking boots
yeah,
on
yeah,
and stuff. So I mean, I think that there is definitely yeah, this big dare, this idea of if you faster, number one, in the Alps, you can be home in time for the pizza place to be open still, but also you can go farther, right? You can connect
hmm,
pieces that you as a hiker
yeah,
just couldn't connect, right?
yeah. And there's such an interesting thing happening in the Alps right now that I'm fascinated by. That you know, with as the climate changes, the mountains are changing, and
Hmm.
the Alps that have you know historically been a lot of ice and glaciers and bad weather and snow and um, true kind of mountaineering terrain, these things are kind of drying out and glaciers are going away. There's rock showing. The mountains are changing, and the way we do them is now kind of can change. So all of a sudden, things that you've always had to do with crampons on up a big snow slope is bare rock, and you can go up it in running shoes. And to me, this is just fascinating because coming from the Sierra in California, where they're bone dry, but you can see where the glaciers were, and you see how the landscape changed. The Alps are well on their way to that, right?
Hmm.
I mean,
Hmm.
we look right out our window from where we live at huge glaciers on the Jungfrau, and we're watching it change. We're watching glaciers disappear and the rock shows, and then it heats up and it further melts the ice on the sides.
Hmm.
Now it's just a big rock ridge. So all of a sudden, these routes that people were doing, you know, multi-day, very slowly, you know, with glacier crossing and or glacier travel and snow slopes, all of a sudden you're doing in running shoes,
Hmm.
and and people are starting to kind of get it, like, oh, I can start to do these things now pretty differently. I don't have to do it in 2 days. I can, if my fitness goes increases, I can do things in a day, you know, car to car, and that's becoming a thing, and it's neat to see. It's you know it's slowly catching on, but it because it goes against the traditions of
Hmm.
hike to hut, climb mountain, descend to hut, return to
Hmm.
car. You know?
That's a good positive spin on sort of the realities of climate change, right? Because what I'd be worried
Oof,
about too is that the permafrost disappearing some of these super awesome peaks. I'm thinking of the Dolomites, right? How many of them will really severely change how would they look like? Because
yeah.
the rock can't stay up there, right?
Well, you have to pick and choose what you do
Hmm.
because yeah, as it gets steeper, there's a lot of stuff peeling off now in the summer that you know used to be frozen in place. But
Hmm.
a couple of years ago, a friend of mine called me, and it was the hot summer of 2022, and where it was just record heat every day.
Yeah, yeah.
And he contacted me, and he was like, "I heard that the Aletschhorn is dry for the first time," and he said, "Let's run it." And I was like, "Are you kidding me? Like that thing is it's enormous, you know,
Hmm.
it's done like expedition style, like
Hmm.
in 2 or 3 days." And and I just couldn't imagine doing it in running shoes because it's like one of these famous like true mountaineering peaks with this big snow slope at the top and a glacier crossing. So we looked into it, and he was right. It had dried out. I didn't know, and So we did it car to car, and we did it in running shoes, and we got to the big snow slope that was no longer there. It was just dry rock, but it was low angle. So, it was kind of dirty, but it was just talus, and there was nothing to fall down on you. And up we went. And
Hey,
I mean, that was like really a sign of change.
yeah, yeah. But true to your style, you just did it. You didn't record it and report it on Strava and on fastest known time. You just did it as an adventure.
Yeah, I mean, of course, it's on our Strava and it's on our website, but no, I didn't send it into the new website. I mean, yeah, we didn't go so far to look into anything. But the hut keepers they were like, we've never seen this before.
Yeah.
Like they were in the morning. We went in to get a drink at the hut, and yeah, they were definitely a little concerned about our mentality.
Hmm.
Like how we were going. But we checked back in the evening, and they were like, wow, times are changing.
Yeah, that's crazy. Oh,
Yeah,
super.
and we saw there were people up there, in still expedition style. They had, big boots on and, plodding away up the thing, and we ran up and down it.
Well, that's cool, and that's cool, and that's that you are able to do something like that because someone who doesn't know you would see you and saying, "Okay, you are doing something really, really stupid."
Yeah,
Going up a mountain like that with seemingly under prepared gear is you often a sign for disaster. But if you know what you're doing, then you can limit your gear and you can be faster and safer, right? I mean, that's what
yeah,
we've been seeing I mean, that's was Uli Steck's whole point of like how many hours do you want to hang in the Eiger North Face, right? I mean, I
yeah,
remember when I was a kid, it was still called the Eiger Mottwand, right? I mean, it was the murder wall because people spent days in that wall and the weather changed and they had to bivvy in there and stuff, and now you do it. You, meaning somebody who's fast, not me, right? Do it in a short amount of time where you can capture the weather window right, and you can do it
yeah,
reasonably safe, right?
yeah. I mean, it's speed is your friend for sure.
Hmm.
The key is to know when you can do it, when the conditions are right, that it
Hmm.
will allow you to do it in that style. That's the key, and that's where the experience comes in.
Yeah.
Because of course you can go do Mont Blanc in running shoes, but you have to know when you can do Mont Blanc in running shoes.
Hmm. Hmm.
That's the big difference.
Yeah. And the combination of lighter gear, better weather forecasting now in the Alps, you've got cell coverage everywhere, right? I mean, you know
Yeah, yeah,
exactly what the weather is going to be like. And so, in some respects, these places become safer and safer as a playground.
yeah, yeah. But it does make a difference to have that, cell phone coverage, because
Hmm.
when you're in Europe, you mean, I mean, realistically, I don't push myself so much anymore, like in dangerous situations, but a little bit, because you're like, well, in your head, you're like, well, it's just a phone call away and Rega comes. But when I was on the Himalaya last year by myself for a month, and I was just running around, I was recognizing that I was being considerably more cautious,
Hmm.
like with bounding down anything or pulling on anything on some ridges, and I was being really careful and I realized there's no phone call now,
Yeah,
so and I'm alone, so it's pretty different.
super.
But yeah, back to like the speed thing and the people warning you about, like the mentality that's still around is, in 2017, we ran the Glacier Haute route, Chamonix to Zermatt,
Hmm.
and we followed the ski route. So we were on glaciers a lot of the time, and we did it in running shoes, and we had shorts on, and but we carried a rope, and we did rope up a lot. But we were runners on the thing, and with little crampons on, and every group that we saw with a guide was furious. Like, we got reprimanded, we got told to go down. They assumed we were idiots.
Hmm.
We were just like, like, A, we know what's up in terms
Hmm.
of rescue and glacier travel, but we can get out of here fast. Like, yeah, if the weather changes, we're down fast.
Hmm.
And you're not. you know, you've got
And
your
you're
big group.
not. Yeah.
Yeah, you've got your big group, with 6 people on a rope, and you're you're not down fast,
Hmm.
and we have the same ability, the skills as you. Um, yeah, it's as soon as people see what you're doing, they think you're an idiot. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I
Because
mean,
you
it's
really told us what we're doing is not possible after we've done it.
yeah, yeah, and it's difficult. I mean, it comes back to the whole point of how trail running isn't that photogenic, right? It's hard to capture because it looks like you're not doing a serious activity, right? You're not wearing the mountaineering gear. You're not
Mhm.
wearing the stuff that you're supposed to be in order to be in a place that looks like far away, right? But if you're fast, it's not that far away, right? If you're fast and
It's
you have
not
the
that far
skills
away.
and the experience, then you can be through these potential dicey situations faster, and you can respond to weather changes faster, which weather changes is what most people gets in trouble in the mountains, right?
Yep, yep. I mean, it's all experience. It's all
Hmm.
your experience and how much, yeah, how risky do you want to be, and but yeah, base those decisions on your experience.
Yeah,
That's really what it comes down to.
amazing. Dan, this was an absolute incredible conversation. I don't want to keep you that much longer. I super appreciate your insight of years, not just working, but living this outdoor life and sort of seeing a little bit through your lens, pun intended, of how things have changed and haven't changed, and also sort of having, especially after like weeks of like fighting over this UTMB stuff, to sort of step away from it and looking at what the outdoors can be, which is an do I want to say an awesome playground? No, let's not
Careful.
call it that.
In the Alps, it's a great playground.
In the Alps, it's a great
Yeah,
playground.
yeah,
An incredible wild place to sort of find yourself and experience adventures. Fantastic.
yeah. Man, like coming back here, Kim and I went for a run 2 days ago. We went up into the White Mountains east of town here, and we were like following cat tracks up the trail numerous times, and just you see a bighorn sheep, and just you're alone, and it's just so beautiful.
Hmm.
And yet you're moving through this environment in a really aesthetic way. Like it's so much different than hiking.
Yeah.
When you're running and you're managing your body a little bit and your effort and your output, as opposed to just kind of walking along. And it's just beautiful to do that. It can be playful and fun, and then just the performance side of it. I still just am fascinated by what sets it apart from other movement through the mountains,
Hmm.
and how simple it is. You don't have anything with you. You feel a little bit wild.
Yeah. I mean, it brings, because you're taking less stuff, it brings the adventure closer. You don't need to be on some overhang. You don't need to be on a glacier, right? I mean, if you
Right.
going down 20 switchbacks, but you're going down running, right? You feeling a little bit that adventure that, yeah, you wouldn't if you would be just hiking it, right?
Yeah. And when it takes time, but when you get fit enough to like run kind of wild, and you feel that fitness
Hmm.
in it, you do feel a little bit wild, and it feels so good.
You see,
And it's
that's
like
what we
kind of
need.
attaining enlightenment, right? Like it's like the
Yeah.
runner's enlightenment
That's what we
when you
need to
get to
capture
that.
with the camera, because I think you
I
just
know.
really nailed that, because it
Hmm.
is there, right? I mean, I
It's
think
there.
there is something there, right?
Yeah. Yep.
And it doesn't have to be on these insanely exposed ridges the way
No.
Killian sometimes takes his GoPro, right? And he goes up Norway to some of these like exposed mountains, right? And he like runs over these ridges, and you're like, oh my gosh, just watching it makes me nauseous, right? That looks impressive, but that's then also so exposed and so rare to capture that it's especially because of that. But you can feel that, yeah, even just like running down a winding trail, right?
Yeah. It's capturing a feeling. It's
Yes.
really hard to do. Every now and then you see it in an image, but yeah, it's really hard. And you have to have kind of experienced it, I think, to get it.
Hmm.
Then you get it.
Hmm.
But yeah, if you've never experienced it, I hope you can aspire to it. Maybe you still kind of can sense something in an image, like, wow, that looks really fun because there is something there in this person, what they're experiencing at that moment.
Yeah.
So
No, that's
yeah,
amazing.
kind of an
I,
enlightenment.
I love it. I love it. Then, before I let you go, tell folks where they can you have several web properties. So we don't have to send them to social media alone, which is very nice. Tell them where people can learn about you and your work and find your books and everything.
We did first book that we did was Around the Alps, Switzerland, which is the guide to the Swiss Alps, and that book, and then all of our other runs. Our main website is AlpsInsight.com, and that's all the Alps. That's the guidebook to Chamonix that we've really been working on the last couple of years. And then it's the guide to the Alps in general. And there's like 130 runs on the site now. And then there's a lot of information, training information, gear information, like kind of the running philosophy of, I guess, like the non-racer mentality.
Mm-hmm.
So that's our big website. But then in California, we did 3 years ago, we did Sierra Trail Runs, which is the guidebook to the Eastern Sierra, and a little bit in Death Valley and the White Mountains, and that's sierratrailruns.com.
Yeah.
And that's specifically California.
So it's just to give 2 seconds, 2 sentences, give people a little bit of an idea of how do they find, or what do they find when they're looking for a specific run? Like, do you search by miles you want to run, location? Like, how do you sort of approach it and stake that out for yourself?
I think that people are like, we use photos, like we really use images to present the run. If you want to do really a classic runner's running tour where you're running trails, I think we show that. And if you're going to climb a peak, we show that. And if you're going to go cross country, we're going to show you in fields of talus. And in the Alps, then we're just, it's kind of, where are you going? Are you going to Zermatt? Are you going to Chamonix? Are you going to Grindelwald? And then you can filter that way.
Perfect.
Of course, Chamonix that's the hot spot on our site. It's where everybody comes from to see.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah. But in California, I think it's really looking at the photos in the book. It really shows what the flavor of the experience will be. It is. We have purely runners running tours and then the more adventurous stuff.
I like it. So it is sort of, it starts sort of at an inspiration point, right? You sort of find these places by looking at these photos and say, this is where I want to see myself. This is what I want to experience, right? And then from there you figure out, okay, do I want to run 8 miles or 28?
Yeah. And that's what we want. We want people to be really motivated by the images.
Perfect.
And that's definitely the goal. And then and you can choose your route based on that.
Dan, thank you so much for your time. I so appreciate you making Singletrack your very first podcast appearance. I am very, very honored by that.
Well, thank you, Matthias. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Dan, for this fun chat. And thank you, dear listeners, for joining us. This is Singletrack, and I see you over at Electric Cable Car for daily trail and mountain news. I'm your host, Matthias Eichler, saying Auf Wiedersehen und Tschüss.